So, on behalf of the ABA Dispute Resolution Section Membership Committee, and in particular John, who will introduce himself shortly, I'd like to welcome you to this incredible Ask an Expert day with Stevenson Carlebach. I'm Kim Best, the membership officer. The dispute resolution section believes that as practitioners, a rising tide lifts all boats, and it is for that we have programs like this. I would like to introduce you to our boat captain, our section director, Jennifer Mickle.
So, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. My name is Jen Mickle. I am the director of the ABA section of dispute resolution. As many of you know, our section connects 12,000 professionals and leaders all over the world. We offer innovative programs, thought leadership, and essential networking to improve your practice. Whether you're interested in online programs or in-person meetups, or even just meeting a peer within the industry, perhaps across the country, you're in the right place. We house mediators, arbitrators, legal educators, judges, solo practitioners, students, attorneys, DR providers. This section is truly the place for those who are committed to dispute resolution as a practice.
Okay, I'd also like to introduce you to our chair-elect, Liz Hill.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Hill. I currently serve as an organizational ombudsman at the University of Colorado Boulder. And as Kim said, I currently serve as chair-elect of the section of dispute resolution. I'm excited to step into the role of chair in the upcoming bar year, and we have, many meaningful initiatives on the horizon, really focusing on doing less better and deepening our member engagement across the section. So nice to see so many faces here. Thanks for being a part of this community and for joining this conversation. Thanks, Kim, for organizing.
Thanks, Liz. And I will let John introduce himself and Stevenson.
Great. Thank you, Kim. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm John Lewis. I'm a mediator in Birmingham, Alabama. I've been practicing law for 30 years here, and I'm moving into mediation full-time. I did take that course at Harvard, and Stevenson was one of our wonderful professors, and I thought he'd make a good program today. Stevenson is an independent trainer, consultant, and executive, and specializing in negotiation, communication, and conflict management. He has a firm, EQ. He's worked with Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and he is currently writing a book, The Influence Equation, Overcoming Resistance and Changing Minds. With that, I want to welcome Stevenson, and we appreciate you being here, Stevenson.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Hopefully, we'll have a great conversation and hear from you, questions, thoughts, and reactions. I'm want to hear from you guys as much as I want to talk. So let me pass it back to you, Kimberly.
Thank you. Yes, this is Ask an Expert, which means we would love for you to feel free to ask any questions along the way of Stevenson. And in lieu of that, of course, we have some questions that we would like to ask you while everybody's getting their thought processes going, particularly around your impressive resume. I'm going to start with how do you cultivate genuine curiosity when you're mediating between parties who seem completely intractable? I know you do work with intractability. And what does curiosity look like in practice during a session?
So I love the question. I feel like so much of what we do when we do it well as mediators is being curious. But it's also a cognition that doesn't come easily. Psychologists describe it as it's not a top-down, it's a bottom-up cognition. That is to say, we can't just go, be curious. Something has to pique our curiosity. So it's a complicated challenge. So I think one of the things that we all, I know I have to fight with myself about is to get out of the fixing it mindset, the solving it, like I've got a great answer, it's going to solve these people's problem, into a sort of finding out mindset. And, it's really easy to say, but I don't know about you, but when I get an answer and I think, ooh, this is it, if I'm like a little kid in the classroom who knows the answer, my brain sort of goes into I know mode, and I lose the what am I missing mode. So that's the first thing, I think, just to be always watching myself for, have I fallen into the fix it mode as opposed to the finding out what the problem is. And part of the answer to doing that is to keep asking myself or yourself, what don't I actually know here? What am I missing? I find this is particularly important. I mean, we'll talk about emotions, I think, more today, but this is particularly important when I'm dealing with people who I'm having a reaction to. Curiosity in a way is the opposite of certainty. And certainty has been characterized by several psychologists as an emotion. It has a lot of similarities to emotions in terms of how it forms, where it happens in the brain, et cetera. And so one of the cures, I think, is to find things you don't know that you're not certain of. And then the third thing that I think is really helpful is, if one can do it, is to notice and name the judgment. Why am I having such a strong reaction? What makes me characterize this person that way? To try to get underneath it. If people are stubborn, it's because they're not seeing how their needs are going to be met. So even if their behavior seems intimidating or unfair, or that to your mind they're not acting in their own best interests, it's always worth triggering the thought, well, what am I missing? In what way might they think that behavior is serving their interests? So I don't have a simple answer for that, because I think it's a lifelong battle. But those are a couple of things that I think can be helpful.
I love curiosity is the opposite of certainty, and personally, the way I mitigate for thinking I know what's best for someone is recognizing that I have a snapshot of their life. I'm only in a little bitty piece of their life, and they have a whole motion picture.
Exactly.
And I literally will say in trainings that if you think you know what's best for someone else, that's arrogant, which is very blunt, but it's also very true, because we just have this little picture.
Yeah. But it's amazing. I mean, one of the great things about the human mind is how quickly we can go from a tiny little detail into a full-blown thought or assumption. It's genius, but of course, in mediation, it's genius that destroys our technique, because I hear somebody talk for 15 minutes, I know everything about them, and I know what's wrong with them, and it's like, so you're 100% right. Battling that is really key.
So, Stevenson, you've mentioned transforming resistance into productive dialogue as part of your research. Can you share specific techniques for when parties are actively resistant to the mediation process itself?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I think is to diagnose the resistance before you try to treat it. Ask about it. It's funny how seldom not just in mediation, but I think often when we run into resistance, we'll push against it. And sort of the instinct is to either push against it or give up, as opposed to going, you don't seem into this, or you seem pretty resistant, or it seems to me that you're not quite trusting this process. Tell me about it. Like, why should they just met you? Why should they trust you as a mediator? It's totally in their interest to be a little suspicious. I'm sure many people have tried to help them with this situation before and haven't. So, accept the resistance for what it is, name it as gently as you can. I think, using private sessions as a better chance to get them to open up about the resistance. What else would I say about, I think like with all emotions, treat resistance as an emotion, and normalize it. Like, yeah, of course, you have a lot riding here. This conflict has been going on for a long time. I can certainly understand why you would be cautious going into this process. And then reassure them that, a good outcome is one that both or multiple parties feel completely comfortable with. And that's what you're driving for. You're not driving for a solution. You're driving for a solution that they agree with and they feel comfortable with. And you take their resistance seriously as and not personally.
Great.
Yes, so I'm hearing curiosity about the resistance as the first step.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we often experience resistance as some kind of antagonism. And I think it's very easy as a mediator. Here I am, and I'm, giving up my time and I'm trying to solve this. And I come with all these skills. And of course, I want what's best for you. So that's all our identity stuff. And so their resistance can feel like an affront to our identity and very quickly knock us off our game.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Also, when you're sorry, Kim. When you're asking about the resistance, they feel heard and they build trust with you.
Absolutely.
So, Stevenson, you have a book coming out soon, maybe. I don't know exactly when. The Influence Equation, Overcoming Resistance.
Writing it.
Yeah. Can't wait for it. Overcoming resistance and changing minds. There's like no resistance at all in the world right now. So I'm not sure. I'm kidding. But what is the influence equation, and what are the key psychological dynamics that mediators should understand about how people resist change or new perspectives?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. So the influence equation is, I think it's a kind of a mindset trick. One of the things I've noticed over the years is that many people, not everybody, but many people, if you ask them, and I've started doing this when I teach workshops, I'll ask people early on in the workshop, I'll say, get into small groups and come up with your best advice for influence. And people almost always say, listen, ask good questions, understand what's important to them. They may have other answers, but usually those are the top 3 answers. And then I'll put them into an exercise and I'll say, you have 2 minutes to convince this other person of something that's important to you. And I really emphasize, think of something that's really important to you. And then at the end of the 2 minutes, I ask the other person, how many questions did the influencer ask you? And, the general answer is this, or maybe this. In 2 minutes, people ask like 20 statements. And out of 20 statements, last time I taught this, I taught a workshop at Program of Negotiation at Harvard, and there were 60 people, and the average was 0.6 questions. So less than 1 as an average. And that's because it's so quick. Our brain goes so quickly to persuading is saying what we know or what we think is right. So I think the default way we persuade, or we try to convince people, is by leading them to the answer that we have in our mind. And as mediators, we can fall into that trap as well. we get trained to ask questions, but they can turn into leading questions if we're not super watchful. So what I came up with as an antidote to that, or the mindset shift, is influence equals persuasion, our persuasion, over, it's an equation, resistance, like their concerns. And what's fun about that is very simply shifts our optics from why I'm right, why you should do what I think is best, to what's their resistance. And it turns out that our ability to persuade or influence people is always the result of whatever persuasion you're using and how it knocks up against their resistance. So that's the basic equation, just a mindset shift. But it's led me to, as I did the research, to realize that there's sort of three categories of resistance. One is logic. Am I using language that makes sense to them? Am I using it? Does my source work for them? Am I using logic that fits their narrative of the world? My colleague Doug Stone, who wrote Difficult Conversations, thinks I shouldn't call it logic. I should call it narrative, because we're not really logical. We just have all these narratives. But I stick with logic because invariably as humans, we think we're being logical, even if we're just being, our brain is running on its own narratives. And there's a little equation there. What's persuasive is what's logical to them, and what creates resistance is what's illogical to them. And what I love about that is it asks our brain not to think of what's right or what's logical, but to think what's logical to them. What will they buy? I've worked a lot with folks in medicine, and I like to play with them around dealing with people who are vaccine skeptics. And very often their first go-to is studies that they think are really scientifically useful, in spite of the fact that very often the people who they're trying to persuade are in fact allergic to the CDC or the FDA or big pharma, where the studies are coming from. So it has to be logical to them. So that's the first one. The second one, I'm sorry, I'm going on and on. The second factor is interest. What creates resistance is unmet interests. What's persuasive is met interests. So really simple. If they're not saying yes, there's probably some unmet interest that's creating some resistance. And the last one is trust. And the equation there is, do they see you as an ally or an adversary? So three quick ways to sort of diagnose what's causing the resistance. It's almost always either language or narrative that doesn't make sense, their interests aren't being met, or in some way they don't trust us or this process. And if you can discern that, it becomes much easier to go after, to unpack their resistance, which, as John pointed out earlier, helps them feel heard. Of course, there's no problem with resistance. We need to understand what it is if we're going to, in any way, mitigate it.
Stevenson, it's Bill Johnston from Delaware. Could I ask a quick question?
Yeah, Bill.
First of all, thank you very much for joining us. For super helpful. On that last point, the trust point, when you referred to ally or adversary,
yeah,
do you have in mind ally in the sense of a reliable neutral, trying to assist the parties achieving a resolution? I mean, rather than an ally being someone who is directly aligned with the interests.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think one has to be Well, no, you actually, Bill, I'm not going to say anymore. I think you said it really, really perfectly. So well done. That I think a neutral can be an ally in trying to, find a way to get their interests met and create a process where they can move from conflict into a useful resolution.
Thank you. Thanks much.
I think it is when you're fiercely for both sides or all sides is a way of what the term that Ken Cloak calls omnipartial, which is what I use. Yeah, and for all sides.
I think also, I don't know if this goes along with that, but you can be empathetic without agreeing.
Yeah, great point.
Stevenson, there are a lot of power imbalances in mediation in the different parties. How does that affect your influence equation in mediation, and how can mediators address that?
Power imbalances are really interesting because they create a different kinds of sort of resistance challenges. I made some notes here. I want to pull them out. So if somebody has high power, they can sometimes influence without listening. And the danger is they can get agreement without commitment. So a mediator move that might be really helpful would it be, what would it like to not just get agreement, but get real buy-in? Or could you live with them agreeing to something that they will half-heartedly not go along with? I think it's just a really good question to ask and get them to think deeply. What do I need here? Do I need agreement or real buy-in? And I think it goes the other way as well. If somebody's in a low power position, resistance often goes underground. So you may well have experienced where a party goes quiet. They're not verbalizing their resistance, but it's there anyway. It shows up in silence or vague deflection. And sort of, I think the mediator move is to create space for that resistance, whether you're doing it in a caucus or some other way, and to find a way for it to be safely expressed. So, I might say, you could see this in family dynamics where you might want to say, sometimes people feel pressure to say yes, even when they're not fully on board. Can we check in on that? Or, what would be the problem from your perspective of saying no? What are your concerns and how might we address those? So really just get them up on the table and to be looking for those all the time. Any follow-up questions or thoughts about that?
Well, I think
there is a question in the chat. Can you address whether your approach really fits for business disputes? It seems more appropriate for personal matters such as personal injury or divorce, including a business divorce. I'm a construction attorney, and the parties I deal with are more interested in getting to the bottom line.
Yeah, I definitely think it's really helpful for interpersonal. And I think in, corporate, any kind of business situation, you can encounter a huge amount of resistance. And so, and I think it forms along the same lines. So just because we're interested in the bottom line doesn't mean that I'm not going to be resistant to somebody else's approach or somebody else's solution if I don't feel that my interests are met, if the solution you're talking about doesn't make sense to me, or if I don't trust that if I say yes, you'll comply, or there isn't some kind of trick here that you're using to get a win in court or get a win in front of the mediator.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks, Jess.
So that question leads right into our next question, which is how do negotiation dynamics differ between corporate boardrooms government agencies and family therapy sessions? What
Yeah.
universal principles transcend these contexts?
I love that question. And I did make some notes on it if I can find them. So there's a couple of different categories. I'm going to start with the emotional. One, of course, is in each of those settings, emotions are treated differently. In a corporate setting, and emotions might be really underground, unexpressed, or they get expressed in assertiveness. Of course, in family dynamics, they might be all over the place. So one principle is whether or not people seem completely calm, and as Marjorie asked, focused on the bottom line, emotions are there and they need to be managed. How you manage them is different depending on the context. If I'm dealing with a corporate setting, I'm probably not going to use a lot of touchy-feely psychological language, but I definitely will surface emotions as a discussion point. I'll tell you a quick story if this doesn't digress us too much. My dad was a World War II veteran, and he was very much of the generation that men had one appropriate emotion, and it was, well, maybe two: anger and frustration. And pretty much all the others were unavailable to him, or he struggled to express them. And I remember this is after my mom had died, and they had been together for 50 years. And it was one of these relationships where she took care of everything: emotions, social, cooking, you name it. So he was really lost. And so I would go and hang out with him, and he loved watching football. So I would go and sit with him and watch football. He loved to bet on it. So it was sort of funny because we'd be sitting in a game, it would be like 53-3, and he'd think it was a close game because it was a 50-point spread. But so anyway, I would go, and I remember, I wanted to sort of touch base to see how he's doing. So I said, at one point I was like, Dad, how are things going with Mom's loss? His reaction was, let's see how the Cowboys are doing. Total fail. Another time I tried again. Dad, things are so different without Mom. Again, switched games, wanted to see how his other bet was going. So finally, I'm like racking my brain. How can I connect with this guy about this? And there just happened to be a Ford truck commercial. And, there was, Ford truck commercials, like big guys with trucks and chains and mud pulling things. And, what's the motto? Ford tough. So I was like, Dad, how are things? Tough? And he was like, and it was just this whole other level of connection, because I wasn't using touchy-feely words he was not uncomfortable. I wasn't saying sad or lonely. I was using a manly word like tough, and he connected with that. So, to me, one of the biggest principles that goes through all of those contexts is people are emotional, their identities are at play, and to find a way to get that into the conversation in a way that won't embarrass anybody, won't make anyone feel thrown under the bus, will make room to think more clearly. Just because people are masking emotions doesn't mean they're having them. And when people are emotional, they're not fully logical. It's hard to focus clearly on all their interests. They tend to overly be focused on their emotional interests. So having a way of dealing the emotions, I think helps in all of those contexts.
I love that story. It's meeting someone where they are and finding the way to do that, and then what that unlocks. Yeah, great story.
I think that also, by you telling that story, I think telling stories like that in mediation helps the other side appreciate what you're saying and maybe think a little more.
Yeah.
This may go along with that answer, but you've worked with White House appointees, Pentagon officers. How do you adapt mediation techniques in high pressure, high stakes environments?
I think it's a really good question. There's a couple of things I think are really key. One is to acknowledge the pressure and the time without letting it force us into problem solving before we're ready. So in many ways, I think in those situations, it's that much more important to create a process that gives people a time to talk about what really matters the most. I think mediators' techniques for controlling process, this is the second point, is really key. So be explicit up front about the process you're going to use in the time you have and why you've made that choice. So they don't feel like, what are we wasting time talking about this stuff? Like we need to fix this. That urgency sort of drives them, which is, totally understandable. And of course, the worst thing we could do is come up with a bad solution in a short amount of time. Better to take more time and come up with a better solution. So be explicit about the process you're using, and why you're using it and why you think it makes sense given the time. Acknowledge the pressure and try to get as much of that on the table as possible. And I think in those situations, there's so many other counterparts that people are worried about. So try to be aware of the full sort of relationship map you're dealing with, because very often the people in the room are trying to come up with solutions that people outside of the room have dictated. So how do I pull in those interests? How do I get to have more explicit conversations of all the influencers who are influencing the conflict? Because nobody at the table is going to say yes to something that they're worried that their boss is, or their boss's boss, or the president, or whoever is going to say no to. So how can we just say, look, all of us here are trying to come up with a solution, not just for ourselves, but for many other people in the room. So we want to, and you can't, we recognize that you can't be explicit about all of those interests. So we're going to try to be as encompassing about the interests as we can, because if we don't solve the right problems, there's no point in coming up with a solution at all. Sort of create space for that.
Well, what can you describe what that process would look like, and what would you describe to someone, Pentagon officers would go in? How would you describe the process? I'm terribly curious about what that would look like.
So, I mean, I think I would start by, designing a process. And then the first thing I would do after introductions is say, here's the process I've designed in the time we have to work on this problem. And then that would be our first mediation. And I would be open to adjusting what that process would be. But I would be explicit that one of the things we want to do is try to understand not just the demands, but what's behind the demands, what your underlying needs, wants, and concerns are. I would say we're going to use a combination of private sessions and joint sessions. Here's how we're going to use the time. Here's how, hopefully I would be doing that with a co-mediator, because when you have groups like that, it's really helpful if you can do some dividing and conquering. and once we agreed on a process, then I would stick to it fairly clearly. But I don't think it's a big surprise to any of you. There's going to be interest identification. There's going to be brainstorming various options. There's going to be discussing out of those options, which we're going to not criticize. We'll just put them on the table. We're going to start to think about what are some criteria that would allow the people you have to answer for to feel like you had gotten a good resolution. So some way of creating criteria, and then just keep marching through it. And anytime we get stuck, I'll go. You go back a step and say, okay, what are we missing? It feels like there's an interest here that is not being met, but that's holding us up. Let's go back there and see what that might be. So some process like that.
Yeah, sounds quite complex. How can individual mediators contribute to broader community conflict resolution and social change, particularly now, and things are a little different?
Different. That's a good term for it. I don't think there's been a time in my life where we've needed mediators, people trained in mediation, to play a significant role in our worlds than there is today. And I think there's a number of ways we could think about that. One would be teaching people to see the structure of the conflict. Mediators understand the sort of the human dynamics that are under the surface. So being able to teach people about them and normalize them. I mean, people get, Kimberly, when we were talking before the session, you were like, yeah, we all get, what was the word you used? I don't think it was stupid, but we all get, stupid when we're upset. Some version of that. What did you say, Kimberly? What was the expression you used?
I mean, it probably was stupid. No, I mean, we aren't bringing our best selves when we're upset, or none of us, right? Like,
no.
Yeah.
So, teaching the sort of understanding that and normalizing it, I think, is the most helpful thing to do. Yes, of course you're shouting. Everyone here is scared to death. Everyone feels that the other side is saying something that is going to undermine what's important to them. That's something you actually have in common. So if we did a better job of that, it's helpful. And I'm going to go on a little tangent here. I don't think it's part of the question, but for me, something that mediators can do in the process of, helping the parties come up with a solution is to just normalize the process and identify a little bit, do a little teaching along the way. Yeah, you can see, this happens to all of us, where our identity as parents can make it really hard to come up with a custody arrangement that doesn't feel in some way that, who we are as a parent is under attack. Just a little move like that just sort of normalizes it. And in my experience, very often people are like, oh, yeah, that's right. And it just drops the temperature in the room. So one thing is teach about the human dynamics. Teach teachable tools. I mean, the concept of interests underlying positions, that's been around for 40, 50 years. We got so much more teaching to do in the world. So instead of, a town meeting where people are just making demands, stand up and say, I'd love to understand why each side wants that. What does that mean to you? Could I spend 2 minutes understanding that person's interests and then 2 minutes on yours, so we have a better understanding of what's at stake here? I think those moves are really powerful, and mediators are particularly helpful at doing those. And I think the whole idea is for us to equip people to not need us. I think if we're really good, we're putting ourselves out of business. So that would be the goal.
So Jason Rosen, who was in our class, hey Jason,
Hey,
has a question. I love the concept of red brain, green brain from the Harvard course. Can you speak about that a bit?
Yeah. I mean, this is the whole idea of sort of fast thinking, slow thinking. Our brain is hardwired to use as little energy as possible. And that means it relies on biases and heuristics and patterns to make quick decisions. That's fast thinking. We do it like 90% of the time, and it works just great. You see, a red octagonal sign, your brain goes, "Oh, that's a stop sign," unless maybe, as my Italian friend sees that more as a slow sign. But depending on your heuristics, you identify these things. It doesn't take a lot of energy. Our brain is like 3% of our body mass, and it uses over 20% of vital resources like glucose and oxygen. So it's a brain hog. So our brain is always trying to like save energy. But that means that we go into a whole series of patterns of thought that are sort of hardwired. I'm right, you're wrong. That's sort of a hardwired, that certainty is a very quick heuristic that our brain falls into. But it stops us from being able to step back and say, wait a minute, I'm right about some things. What am I not right about? What am I missing? What are they right about? So the key is, I mean, we're all, red brain is when we're in the fast thinking, and it happens anytime we're having strong emotions. For mediators, I think one of the important things to realize is how quickly, and sometimes without any awareness, we go into the red brain. You know, that party was really rude, or that party is, you know, gets me if like a man is overbearing. So guy's overbearing, and it's a man and a woman, like my brain just has an emotional reaction. So I think being aware of our red brain and watching it happen, it happens really quickly, whether we want it or not, whether we're aware of it. So then the question is, how do we get ourselves back into the green brain? The green brain is slow thinking. If I give you a math problem, you will use your green brain to solve it. And that's where a lot of really good problem solving happens. One of the super skills that mediators have, as you all know, is asking good questions. Asking questions that the red brain can answer. They say, that's totally unacceptable. So an answer would be, it sounds like so you could ask about the interests. So what interests of yours does that solution not meet? Or you could go to an emotional question. It sounds like that answer frustrated you. Is that right? Are there any other, do you feel angry? Do you feel, when you say unacceptable, you feel like we're not hearing what's important to you? Asking questions that make them think is gonna get the green brain going. So just being aware of that, I think, is really helpful. One of the things we often find is that mediators, when emotions start to bloom, you start to see a lot of red brains. Mediators want to calm things down and remind people of the rules. Let me remind you not to interrupt, as opposed to acknowledging the emotions. And realizing the emotions are actually reflecting really something important that's going on. And even if maybe they're being rude, or maybe they're being illogical or unskillful, but there is, it's sort of the same idea behind resistance. The question is, how do I figure out what's causing that, what's behind it, and use that in order to learn more about what's going on. I think I just went on a rampage there. I think I got way off of the question. Did I answer any of
No,
it?
that was a great
No, I think-
answer. The lot of tidbits are helpful in there. Just a lot to remember as well. Go ahead, John.
I was just gonna say, I think this question that we had, I'm skipping ahead because it follows along with that. How do you maintain your own emotional regulation and curiosity when dealing with particularly challenging cases?
Yeah. How do I? Do I? The question is, do I? It's really hard. My first career was theater. There was a guy named William Ball, Bill Ball. He founded the San Francisco Repertory Company, and he wrote a wonderful book on directing. And he said the key to directing is to love your actors. And when I was directing, I found that to be true. And the reason it's true, and by the way, some actors make it really hard to love them, I just want to say, but the reason it's true is because if they feel safe with you, they will open up. They'll become more, their emotions will become more available to them. They'll try different things. They'll get more creative. And I think the same applies in mediation. Not only if you can love, and I don't mean fall in love, but I mean to care about them as people, to see the humanity in them, to love the crazy adjustments people make to solving the problems in their lives. Finding that appreciation helps me not be so reactive when I'm dealing with behaviors or situations that I find really difficult personally, but whether they're triggering me because I have a very different moral compass than one of the parties or whatever. So, and the second part I've talked about a little bit, but maybe I can elaborate. And the second part of emotional regulation, I think, is just developing a much better awareness of my own triggers. To that, I think Roger Fisher and what's his name? Shapiro, Ben Shapiro? No.
Dan?
Dan, that's it. Dan Shapiro's
Dan.
work, Beyond Reason, is a wonderful little snapshot of the kinds of emotional interests that people have that often trigger reactive behavior. And they list 5. I could probably add a few more, but I think they're really helpful. Appreciation, feeling appreciated, feeling heard. This is what good mediators do really well. Affiliation, feeling a sense of belonging. We do this when we make sure people feel heard, when we make sure that each person gets time, when we're really fair in how we're responding to people. So appreciation, affiliation, autonomy, our sense of self-agency, status. This is really reptile brain. This is red brain or purple brain. It's the oldest part of our brain. It's sort of reptilian brain. I know that term isn't used anymore, but if it were, the status would sit there. And it's that, am I being respected? Who's up, who's down? And it's one of the things our brain is always asking is, am I being given appropriate status? And if the answer is yes, emotions go down. If the answer is no, they go up. For me, and the last one is role. Am I being given a role? that fits with my sense of who I am. Very often as mediators, we think of our role as, good person, a peacemaker, and parties may not see us that way. And it can be very triggering when they treat us not as who we would like to be seen, but as somebody else. So being aware of our triggers and getting better at talking ourselves down when we get triggered, I think is really, really helpful. So the question to ask in my head is, why am I having such a strong reaction to this person or that statement? What's getting triggered here? And I find those 5 really helpful, and maybe 6, you could add fairness to that one. A really helpful checklist. And for most of us, there's usually 1, 2, or 3 of those that our brains hit list, the top 3. And so I think you all will find that your brain goes to one of those really frequently. And it can be really helpful to me to go like, oh, Stevenson, there's the status thing. Come down. They're just upset. They're not lowering your status. They're just in a tough situation and they're really worried about the outcome. So I think those 2 things, one is trying to appreciate them despite themselves sometimes. And the second one is being aware of my own triggers.
I usually add face to the concept of face or saving face to that trigger part too, which is, an absence of shame or blame or feeling backed into a corner or pointed out. Yeah.
If you haven't read it, there's a wonderful book around face and status. Keith Johnstone, who he's actually teaches improv. And he wrote a book called Impro. And the first third of it is all about status and how you use that as an actor. But I think it is so helpful for mediators to be aware of the ways we all read whether our status is being raised or lowered and how that works. I think it's incredibly helpful. And in my experience, it's such an unconscious motivator that it's really important to be aware of it. And most of us have sort of cultural norms around status that aren't normal for everybody. So it's helpful to be aware of, a move that I might make to raise somebody's status. Like I often am playful and I tease people as a way of being friendly and showing that, we're buddies. And with lots of people, that makes them feel affiliation and like I wouldn't do that if I didn't respect them. For other people, not so much. So being aware of the cultural implications around status and face, I think is really helpful.
I'm trying to decide, does anyone have a question? I have a question I'd love to ask, but just because we're running out of time, I wonder if anyone else wants to pop in a question. Oh, a comment. Go ahead, Janet.
I posted it. I just really appreciated the idea of even, bravely using the word to love our clients and share what that meant. I think it's something we wouldn't often usually say, but really that care we show them and connection as a human and how much that changes how we act as the mediators, but also how they receive us and how they helps create openness in a different way. So I really appreciated that.
I love that, Janet. I think I love the way you express that. As I heard you say it, I realized that there's a flip side to it, which is some people are really hard for us to love, and that's okay. Just keep trying, and you're not going to love everybody. But if we end up starting to feel, shaming ourselves because we couldn't quite get to like that jerk, that bully in the room, just fake it until you make it. Keep trying to pretend that you do, and hopefully they'll get the pretend, even though it's not 100% in your heart.
Yeah, I feel like this whole conversation helped not just helped us be able to relate to clients better, but normalized the challenges in our own humanity at this. You know, that this is not easy. Someone asked, we have 2 minutes. How do you achieve affiliation with an insurance company? Okay, that's our next conversation.
I love that question, Robert.
Managing our ego. We'll manage the ego in the room. I just want to thank you so much, Stevenson, for sharing this time. I hope all of you, if you haven't joined the ABA, we'd love to have you be part of our very warm and encouraging environment. And I say that only because I believe it. I've experienced it myself. Regardless, we'll have more programs for you to join. So I hope we connect again. I hope we stay in touch, Stevenson. I've really enjoyed getting to know you. John, thank you for making the introduction. And to the staff of the dispute resolution section, thank you always for your support. Everybody have a great rest of your day.
One plug for the program on negotiation, mediation, conflict management, and many other programs that they have. It was a very good course.
Let me just say you're right. So the PON, the program on negotiation, that you can sign up for their newsletter. They have free talks by people who are putting out books. It is worth looking into the PON, Harvard's program on negotiation, and just subscribing to their newsletter for lots and lots of free information, which is wonderful. And then, of course, also some great courses. I went to one with William Ury, who I just love that guy. So thank you all again and have a terrific day. And Stevenson, thank you again.
Thank you, Stephen.
Take care.
Thank you, Kim.